My lord, you should know that the Queen was here yesterday and that she was very upset with you. Do you want to know what she told me? Yes? She told me I'd be disappointed to hear that you offered to let Richard Plantagenet reign as king after your death. How could you make a deal like that, knowing that your son Edward is the rightful heir to the throne? She also told me to tell you to stay away from her because you'll never know what she'll do to you next. And what about this horrible war? Why, just the other day I heard of a soldier's fight to the death only to discover afterward that he'd killed his own son. Then that anguished father says, "Your mother's right. She's really up on things and told me that I never should have joined in this civil war." Now, I had heard that Margaret, your queen, is still very upset about you disinheriting your son, Prince Edward. Perhaps you think this is going to blow over with her? But Edward's mommy isn't one of those women who brooks disappointment easily. Trust me, I've known her all these years, from the time Suffolk first negotiated with her father to the time when she started wearing the royal pants in the family. I don't know whatever happened to that sweet, innocent 15-year-old girl, but every time I heard her talk, I got to thinking about your son, and I'm not sure if he feels his mommy's all right or his daddy's all right. Look, Your Majesty, I think you're making a big mistake giving in to the Duke of York, and I wouldn't trust his sons Edward, George, or Richard either. I can't quite put my finger on it, but they just seem a little weird. So this is the last bit of advice I'm going to offer you. I think your armies can hold off these rebels, but if you truly believe that your best option is to surrender, surrender. But don't give yourself away. My lord, I think I hear them coming. You must away. Away! Away! In 1936, King Edward VIII willingly abdicated the English throne after reigning less than 1 year in order to marry the twice-divorced American Mrs. Bessie Wallace Simpson. Edward gave up the throne for love, but in Henry VI Part 3, Henry gives up the throne because of his weak title and out of fear of losing his very life. So let's take a look at the plot. The play opens with the victorious Yorkists, the Duke of York, Edward, Richard, Warwick, Montague, and Norfolk, pursuing Henry VI and Margaret from the battlefield after the First Battle of St. Albans. When they arrive at the parliamentary chambers in London, York seats himself on the throne, but a confrontation ensues between his supporters and Henry's. After being cornered by Warwick, who has an army with him, Henry agrees that if York allows him to remain king until his death, the throne will permanently pass to the House of York and its descendants. Repulsed by this decision, which also disinherits the king's son Prince Edward, the king's supporters, led by his wife Queen Margaret, abandon Henry, and Margaret declares war on the Yorkists. Clifford vows to support the Queen in order to exact revenge for the death of his father at the hands of York during the Battle of St. Albans. Margaret attacks York's castle in Wakefield and is victorious in battle. During the conflict, Clifford stabs York's 12-year-old son Rutland to death. Margaret and Clifford then capture and taunt York himself and force him to stand on a molehill as they give him a handkerchief covered in Rutland's blood before stabbing him to death. After the battle, as Edward and Richard lament their father's death, Warwick brings news that his own army has been defeated by Margaret's at the Second Battle of St. Albans, and that Henry VI has returned to London, where, under extreme pressure from Margaret, he has revoked his agreement with York. At the same time, George Plantagenet joins his brothers Richard and Edward, and Warwick is joined by his brother Montague. After they regroup, Clifford is killed at the Battle of Towton, and the Yorkists are victorious. During the battle, Henry sits on a molehill and laments his woes. During this time, the king is confronted with the horrors of the Civil War as he observes a father who has killed his son and a son who has killed his father. Following his victory, Edward is proclaimed king and the House of York is established on the English throne. George is proclaimed Duke of Clarence and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and although he complains to Edward that this is an ominous dukedom, it seems to be a prelude of Richard pretending he doesn't want power when actually he wants nothing but power. Just then, the newly crowned King Edward and George leave the court, and we witness Richard reveal his determination to rise to power and take the throne from his brother, no matter what it takes to do so. Meanwhile, Warwick goes to France to secure for Edward the hand of Louis XI's sister-in-law, Lady Bona, in order to ensure peace between the two nations. But when Warwick arrives at the French court, he discovers that Margaret, Prince Edward, and the Earl of Oxford have already come to seek Louis's aid for the conflict in England. But just as Louis is about to agree to supply Margaret with troops, Warwick tells Louis of Edward's marriage offer and convinces the French king to support Edward and approve his marriage to Lady Bona. Unfortunately, back in England, the recently widowed Lady Grey, also known as Elizabeth Woodville, pays a visit to King Edward and requests her late husband's lands be returned to her. However, Edward is captivated by her beauty and promises to return her husband's lands if she will sleep with him. Lady Grey refuses his inappropriate proposal and vows to preserve her honor. Realizing that the widow is not only beautiful, but also clever and virtuous, Edward decides to marry her against the advice of both George and Richard. Meanwhile, back in France, Warwick, Margaret, and the king are notified of this sudden marriage. Warwick is outraged that he's been made to look like a fool. He denounces Edward and switches his allegiance to the Lancastrians. He also promises his daughter Anne's hand in marriage to Prince Edward as a sign of his loyalty. Soon, George and Montague also defect to the Lancastrians, and Warwick invades England with fresh French troops. Edward is taken prisoner and conveyed to Warwick's brother, the Archbishop of York, while the very pregnant Lady Grey, who is now Queen Elizabeth, flees to sanctuary. However, Edward is quickly rescued by Richard, Lord Hastings, and Sir William Stanley. When Henry is restored to the throne, he appoints Warwick and George as his lord's protector, but when news of Edward's escape reaches Henry's court, the young Earl of Richmond is sent into exile in Brittany for safety. Richmond, a descendant of John of Gaunt, uncle of Richard II and son of Edward III, is a potential Lancastrian heir should anything happen to Henry and his son, and therefore must be protected. At Coventry, Edward confronts Warwick's army, but George is persuaded by Richard to leave Warwick and rejoin the Yorkists. Edward and Richard welcome their brother back into the fold. The Yorkists achieve a decisive victory at the Battle of Barnet, and Edward personally kills Warwick. Warwick's brother Montague also dies in the battle. Meanwhile, Edward's forces recapture Henry and convey him to the Tower of London. Oxford and the Duke of Somerset now assume command of the Lancastrian forces and join with the 2nd Battalion, newly arrived from France, led by Margaret and Prince Edward. During the Battle of Tewkesbury, the Yorkists overpower the Lancastrian forces and capture Margaret, Prince Edward, Somerset, and Oxford. Somerset is sentenced to death, while Oxford gets life in prison. Margaret is banished, but Prince Edward is stabbed to death by all 3 Plantagenet brothers after he refuses to recognize the House of York as the legitimate royal family. Eager to work his way up to the throne, Richard goes to London Tower to kill Henry. Richard and Henry taunt each other before Richard stabs the king to death. With his dying breath, Henry prophesies that Richard's future villainy will lead to chaos that will plague England. Meanwhile, back at court, Edward is reunited with Queen Margaret and meets his newborn son. Edward orders celebrations, thinking the civil wars are finally over and that lasting peace is at hand. However, he is unaware of Richard's insatiable desire for power at any cost. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in Henry VI, Part 3. Like Henry VI Part 2, Henry VI Part 3 contains a great number of characters, so let's just look at a few. In this play, Henry VI is really seen as a pacifist, a weak leader, and a very fearful man. He fears the Duke of York's challenge to his crown, Warwick's power to remove him from the throne, and eventually he catches on that Richard is a menace who will eventually take his life. But he probably fears Queen Margaret more than any of them, especially when she finds out that he's disinherited their son Edward from succeeding his father as the King of England. Richard, Duke of York, along with the help of Warwick and his own sons Edward and Richard, is closer than he's ever been to getting the crown. Yet still, even using coercion and force, he never truly grasps it and dies at the hand of Clifford and Margaret. And speaking of Margaret, no more do we see the slightest shred of innocence that she possessed when we first met her in Henry VI Part 1. Now, she is a cold-hearted general leading and fighting a man's war in a foreign country. Let's face it, the odds are stacked against her. And whatever feelings she had about Suffolk or Henry are practically forgotten. Her only aim is to regain the throne so that her son Edward can succeed his father and reign as the King of England. Young Clifford is driven by revenge to fight against the Duke of York and his sons Edward, George, and Richard. Unlike most of the turncoats in the play, Clifford stays loyal to Henry throughout the entire play, even though he finds his pacifistic tendencies to be cowardly and despicable. And finally, we have the Earl of Warwick, who may be my favorite male character in any Shakespeare play. Warwick is known as the Kingmaker. He's not interested in ruling the country, and even turns it down when it's offered to him at the end of this play. But what he wants is always what's honorable, and he wants the right leader to lead England. He's brave, he's valiant, and he's an incredible warrior, and outside of the royal family, he is the richest man in England and owned the most lands. But his most admirable quality is his unwavering commitment to honor and his country. When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in Henry VI Part 3. In this play, we're going to see lots of defections. We'll start off with Clarence, who not only defects against his brother Edward, but is successfully persuaded to rejoin the fold by his brother Richard, the Duke of Gloucester. This is very significant because it allows us to see just how persuasive Richard could be. We also have Warwick's defection, but he did so for the right reasons. It was Edward IV's fickleness in choosing to marry Lady Elizabeth Grey after he had already sent Warwick to France to ask Lady Bona's hand in marriage. This is also significant because despite his wavering, Warwick is always interested in honor and what's right. Louis, the King of France, is only in one scene, yet he switches allegiances twice so fast that you almost forget about him. Another very powerful plot device in this play is the battlefield scene where Henry VI is lamenting his circumstances and encounters a boy who just slew his father and a father who just slew his son in the Civil War. If there was ever a clear anti-war message in Shakespeare, this is it. It's very difficult to watch this scene and not think of all the fathers and sons who died at each other's hands in the American Civil War. The scene is also very reminiscent of Henry V, when Hal goes in disguise to walk through his camp and gauge how his soldiers are anticipating the next day's battle. It's also very moving. And finally, we have curses and prophecies. In many Shakespeare plays, there are prophecies, but sometimes he likes to change it up with curses. In this play, he uses both. The important thing to remember is whether it's a curse or a prophecy, if it's in Shakespeare, it's going to come true. In Act 1, Scene 1, Richard, the Duke of York, is captured and hears of Rutland's death. Since he has nothing left to lose, he unleashes his curse on Queen Margaret, his captor. She, wolf of France, but worse than wolves of France, whose tongue more poisons than the adder's tooth, how ill beseeming it is in thy sex to triumph like an Amazonial trull upon their woes, whom fortune captivates. But that thy face is vizard-like, unchanging, made impotent with use of evil deeds, I would essay, proud queen, to make thee blush, to tell thee whence thou camest, of whom derived were shame enough to shame thee wert thou not shameless. Thy father bears the type of King of Naples, of both the Sicils and Jerusalem, yet not so wealthy as an English yeoman. Hath that poor monarch taught thee to insult? It needs not, nor it boots thee not, proud queen, unless the adage must be verified, that beggars mounted run their horse to death. 'Tis beauty that doth oft make women proud, but God, he knows thy share thereof is small. 'Tis virtue that doth make them most admired. The contrary just make thee wondered at. 'Tis government that makes them seem divine. The want thereof makes thee abominable. Thou art as opposite to every good as the Antipodes are unto us, or as the south to the septentrion. Those are the 7 stars that make up the Ursa Major constellation. O tiger's heart wrapped in a woman's hide, how canst thou drain the life blood of the child, to bid the father wipe his eyes withal, and yet be seen to bear a woman's face? Women are soft, mild, pitiful, and flexible. Thou stern, obdurate, flinty, rough, remorseless. Bidst thou me rage? Why, now thou hast thy witch. Wouldst have me weep? Why, now thou hast thy will. For raging wind blows up incessant showers, and when the rage allays, the rain begins. These tears are my sweet Rutland's obsequies, and every drop cries vengeance for his death, 'gainst thee, fell Clifford, and thee, false Frenchwoman. That face of his, the hungry cannibals would not have touched, would not have stained with blood. But you are more inhuman, more inexorable, 10 times more, than tigers of Hyrcania. See, ruthless queen, a hapless father's tears. This cloth thou dipp'st in blood of my sweet boy, and I with tears do wash the blood away. Keep thou the napkin, and go boast of this, and if thou tell'st the heavy story right, upon my soul the hearers will shed tears. Yea, even my foes will shed fast-falling tears, and say, Alas, it was a piteous deed. There, take the crown, and with the crown my curse, and in thy need such comfort come to thee as now I reap at thy too cruel hand. Hard-hearted Clifford, take me from the world, my soul to heaven, my blood upon your heads. As far as memorable scenes go, let's just look at a few. Most of them are death scenes, because each of them gives us our last look at these unforgettable characters. There's the death scene of the Duke of York in Act 1, Scene 4, at the hands of Margaret and Clifford. There's the agonizingly slow death of young Clifford in Act 2, Scene 6. And then there's the death of Warwick in Act 5, Scene 2, which really is a monumental turning point in this play, because Warwick represents more than a single man. Not only is he a great warrior, he also represents which side is really fighting for the rightful king and for honor. But probably the most memorable scene of the entire play is in Act 2, Scene 5, when King Henry sits upon a molehill during the Battle of Towton, in which he witnesses a boy who has just slain his father and a man who's just killed his son fighting in the Civil War conflict. This scene is very disturbing and unforgettable because we see the loss of innocence as Henry sits by, helpless to do anything about the horrors unfolding right in front of him. There's also one more scene I want to point out. That's the glorious three sons vision in Act 2, Scene 1. When Edward, the Earl of March, and Richard behold three suns dawning together, Edward starts, "Dazzle mine eyes, or do I see three suns?" Richard adds, "Three glorious suns, each one a perfect sun, not separated with the racking clouds, but severed in a pale, clear, shining sky. See, see, they join, embrace, and seem to kiss as if they vowed some league inviolable. Now are they but one lamp, one light, one sun. In this the heaven figures some event." Edward says, "'Tis wondrous strange, the like yet never heard of. I think it cites us, brother, to the field, that we, the sons of brave Plantagenet, each one already blazing by our meads, should notwithstanding join our lights together and overshine the earth, as this the world. Whatever it bodes, henceforward will I bear upon my target three fair shining suns." And Richard finishes by saying, "Nay, bear three daughters. By your leave I speak it. You love the breeder better than the male." The brothers continue to tease each other adolescently, unaware that they're just about to learn about their father's death. It also seems like a prelude to Richard's opening soliloquy in Richard III that begins, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York." When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes that run through Henry VI, Part 3. There are only a handful of honorable characters in this play, so let's look at them first. There's Lady Elizabeth Grey, who refuses to give in to Edward's seductions in order to get her husband's lands back. It's only after he agrees to marry her that she will accept his advances. There's Clifford, who vows to fight to the death for Henry, specifically to avenge his father's death at the hands of the Duke of York. And speaking of honor, in Act 3, Scene 3, we see Warwick's rage at being humiliated by Edward after he snubs Lady Bona by rescinding his offer of marriage and hastily marrying Lady Elizabeth Grey instead. Thus, Edward's shameful and embarrassing treatment of Warwick motivates him to change sides and support Henry VI. Here's what Warwick says in his soliloquy just before he goes back to England. "I came from Edward as ambassador, but I returned his sworn and mortal foe. Matter of marriage was the charge he gave me, but dreadful war shall answer his demand. Had he none else to make a stale but me? Then none but I shall turn his jest to sorrow. I was the chief that raised him to the crown, and I'll be chief to bring him down again. Not that I pity Henry's misery, but seek revenge on Edward's mockery." Richard the Duke of York breaks his oath to Henry VI at the encouragement of his sons Edward and Richard. Edward IV also has no honor. He breaks his engagement to Lady Bona and propositions Lady Grey. Clarence has no honor. He defects 2 times whenever it suits his purpose. But Louis, the King of France, is even worse than Clarence. Not only does he switch sides from Margaret to Edward and back to Margaret, but he does so in a matter of minutes. And when it comes to loyalty, no one can match Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, who remains always staunchly loyal to himself. As you examine this play, you'll see that virtually everyone in it gets exactly what he or she deserves. Richard the Duke of York wants his rightful title, and even though his claim to the throne is stronger than Henry's, his methods are despicable, and in the end, he's beheaded and his head is put on a pike. Henry VI desires to stay king and is even willing to disinherit his own son to do so, but in the end, both are stabbed to death. Margaret wants her son to be king and ruthlessly kills the Duke of York, yet in the end, both her son and her husband are killed. Clarence is not hungry for the crown, but he also doesn't have any strong loyalty to Edward and despises his debauchery. He'll get what's coming to him in Richard III. Edward says that he would break 1,000 oaths to reign 1 year as king. He does become Edward IV, but dies a horrible death as a result of his gluttony and womanizing. Clifford is loyal to Henry VI because Richard, Duke of York, killed his father, but Clifford kills Rutland and dies in battle. Unlike most of the others, Warwick wants the legitimate king to rule England. He's not interested in becoming the king himself, even though Henry offers to have him govern the country. And finally, in Act 1, Scene 2, we get our first glimpse of Richard, Duke of Gloucester's ambition when he says to his father, "Do but think how sweet a thing it is to wear a crown." We know that Richard wants his father to be king because that will eventually enable Richard to get what he wants, which is to become the King of England. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in Henry VI, Part 3. Because of the length, I only want to concentrate on Richard, Duke of Gloucester's soliloquy. When it comes to powerful lines, there are none more powerful in this play than Act 3, Scene 2, when we bear witness to the making of Richard III. As we will see more frequently in the following play, Richard is a master strategist and planner. His endgame is to win the crown, and even though he has many obstacles in his way, he is 100% committed to achieving his goal. Listen to what he has to say here. "I, Edward, will use women honorably. Would he were wasted, marrow, bones, and all, that from his loins no hopeful branch may spring to cross me from the golden time I look for. And yet, between my soul's desire and me, the lustful Edward's titled Buried, is Clarence, Henry, and his son, young Edward, and all the unlooked-for issue of their bodies, to take their rooms ere I can place myself. A cold premeditation for my purpose. Why, then, I do but dream of sovereignty like one that stands upon a promontory and spies a far-off shore where he would tread, wishing his foot were equal with his eye, and chides the sea that sunders him from thence, saying, he'll lade it dry to have his way. So do I wish the crown, being so far off, and so I chide the means that keeps me from it, and so I say I'll cut the causes off, flattering me with impossibilities. My eye's too quick, my heart's o'erweens too much, unless my hand and strength could equal them. Well, say there is no kingdom then for Richard. What other pleasure can the world afford? I'll make my heaven in a lady's lap, and deck my body in gay ornaments, and witch sweet ladies with my words and looks. Oh, miserable thought, and more unlikely than to accomplish 20 golden crowns. Why, love forswore me in my mother's womb, and for I should not deal in her soft laws, she did corrupt frail nature with some bribes to shrink mine arm up, like a withered shrub, to make an envious mountain on my back, where sits deformity to mock my body, to shape my legs of an unequal size, to disproportion me in every part like to a chaos, or an unlicked bear whelp that carries no impression like the dam. And am I then a man to be beloved? O monstrous fault to harbor such a thought. Then since this earth affords no joy to me, but to command, to check, to overbear such as are of better person than myself, I'll make my heaven to dream upon the crown, and whilst I live to account this world but hell until my misshaped trunk that bears this head be rounded impaled with a glorious crown. And yet I know not how to get the crown. For many lives stand between me and home, and I, like one lost in a thorny wood, that rents the thorns and is rent with the thorns, seeking a way and straying from the way, not knowing how to find the open air, but toiling desperately to find it out, torment myself to catch the English crown. And from that torment I will free myself, or hew my way out with a bloody axe. Why, I can smile, and murder whiles I smile, and cry content to that which grieves my heart, and wet my cheeks with artificial tears, and frame my face to all occasions. I'll drown more sailors than the mermaid shall. I'll slay more gazers than the basilisk. I'll play the orator as well as Nestor, deceive more slyly than Ulysses could, and like a Sinon, take another Troy. I can add colors to the chameleon, change shapes with Proteus for advantages, and set the murderous Machiavel to school. Can I do this, and cannot get a crown? Tut, were it farther off, I'll pluck it down. Ironically, Niccolo Machiavelli was not even born when this speech would have taken place in 1465. Oh well, nobody's perfect. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in Henry VI Part 3 and some of the correlations to other Shakespeare plays. One of the reasons why I've come to love this play is because there are so many turning points in it, but let's just look at a few. First, in Act 1, Scene 1, Henry disinherits his son Edward in order to maintain his reign as king. He unleashes Margaret's wrath on him and also all the Yorkists. In addition, he loses the respect of young Clifford and Northumberland, his two strongest military strategists. Not only that, but he even loses his son's respect for him, who sees him as a weak ruler. Next, we have Act 3, Scene 2, where Edward decides to marry Lady Elizabeth Grey instead of Lady Bona. This sets off a chain reaction of negative consequences. Edward loses Warwick's support. Clarence defects to Warwick and marries his daughter. King Louis not only withdraws his support for Edward, but also sends troops to fight against him. And the snubbed Lady Bona wishes him soon dead and urges her brother the king to assist Margaret to defend her honor. And finally, in Act 5, Scene 2, we have the completely unanticipated death of Warwick at the hands of Edward in battle. It's hard to even imagine that anyone could kill this massive warrior, but this victory for Edward pretty much dooms any chance Henry VI has of remaining king, and we see him lose his life at the hands of Richard before the end of the play. This is one of the greatest turning points in the entire War of the Roses. Here's what Warwick says in his dying words. "Ah, who is nigh? Come to me, friend or foe, and tell me who is victor, York or Warwick? Why ask I that? My mangled body shows my blood, my want of strength, my sick heart shows that I must yield my body to the earth, and by my fall the conquest to my foe. Thus yields the cedar to the axe's edge, whose arms gave shelter to the princely eagle, under whose shade the ramping lion slept, whose top branch o'erpeered Jove's spreading tree, and kept low shrubs from winter's powerful wind. These eyes, that now are dimmed with death's black veil, have been as piercing as the midday sun, to search the secret treasons of the world. The wrinkles in my brow, now filled with blood, were likened oft to kingly sepulchres, For who lived king but I could dig his grave? And who durst smile when Warwick bent his brow? Lo, now my glory smeared in dust and blood, my parks, my walks, my manners that I had, even now forsake me, and of all my lands is nothing left me but my body's length. Why, what is pomp, rule, reign, but earth and dust? And live we how we can, yet die we must. There are also some interesting correlations in Henry VI, Part 3, to some of the other Shakespeare plays. Edward propositions Lady Elizabeth Grey, but she remains virtuous and honorable. As a result, he's highly attracted to her and asks her to be his queen. In Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Lysimachus, the governor of Mytilene, first propositions Marina, but when he realizes how virtuous she is, he cannot defile her and eventually asks for her hand in marriage. In As You Like It, Touchstone first starts coming on to Audrey, but when she tells him that she's not a slut, dejectedly he agrees to marry her. And in Measure for Measure, Lord Angelo propositions Isabel after he becomes so attracted to her virtuous and noble qualities. Clarence defects twice in this play and even changes sides in the middle of battle. Warwick also changes sides once after being humiliated by Edward IV. We also saw this happen in Henry VI, Part 1, when Joan Purcell persuades the Duke of Burgundy to turn his back on Henry VI and Lord Talbot and join the French cause. In Henry IV, Part 1, we see the once loyal Percy family, including Hotspur, Worcester, and Northumberland, change sides against Henry IV. Don't you just wish these people would make up their minds already? In Act 5, Scene 1, Henry VI is stabbed to death in the Tower by Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, just like the deposed Richard II was by Sir Piers Exton in Richard II, and how Clarence is at the beginning of Richard III. In Act 1, Scene 3, we see young Clifford kill Rutland, who is just a boy and a pawn of war. In The Life and Death of King John orders Hubert to kill the boy Prince Arthur, who also becomes a casualty of war. And in Richard III, Richard orders James Tyrrell to kill both Edward, Prince of Wales, and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, even though they're just children and pawns in Richard's path to the crown. In Act 3, Scene 4, we see the gates of York closed to Edward, but he persuades the mayor to open them. In The Life and Death of King John, the gates of Angiers are closed to both King John and King Philip, but when a marriage between Louis the Dauphin and Lady Blanche is arranged, the gates are opened wide to all. Also, in Henry V, the gates of Harfleur are closed to Henry, but he persuades the governor to open them or risk great destruction. There are also a lot of biblical correlations in this play. In Act 2, Scene 5, the boy who killed his father in the Civil War exclaims, "Pardon me, God, I knew not what I did." This is almost identical to St. Luke in chapter 23, verse 34, when the crucified Christ asks his Father for forgiving his murderers, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Next, in Act 2, Scene 6, we hear Edward IV say to Warwick, the king builder, "For in thy shoulder do I build my seat." That sounds a lot like a takeoff from St. Matthew in chapter 16, verses 18, when Jesus says to St. Peter, "And upon this rock I will build my church." Next, in Act 5, Scene 1, Edward says to his brother Clarence, who switches sides once again back to him, "Now welcome more, and 10 times more beloved, than if thou never hath deserved our hate." Compare this to St. Luke in chapter 15, verse 7, which reads, "There shall be joy in heaven upon one sinner that doth penance more than upon 99 just, who need not penance." And finally, in Act 5, Scene 7, Richard kisses Edward's newborn son, the presumptive heir to the throne, and says, "Witness the loving kiss I give the fruit." To say the truth, so Judas kissed his master and cried all hail, when as he meant all harm. That's very similar to St. Luke chapter 22, verse 48, which reads, "And Jesus said to him, Judas, dost thou betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about Henry VI, Part 3. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research and came across some interesting facts. But first, this was the first time I had ever watched this play on its own without previously watching all of the other history plays that come before it. And I'm so glad I did, because it allowed me to realize just what a magnificent play Henry VI Part 3 really is on its own. And that's due to the magnificent character development, the abundance of twists and turns, and the roller coaster ride of action as each separate faction tries to beat the other ones to the English crown. Shakespeare took a lot of liberties with the history plays, but you have to admit, what he created were some of the most amazing stories. For example, even though Shakespeare depicts Rutland as being a little boy when he's murdered, he was actually 17 years old when he died and 9 years older than his brother Richard. Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, actually had nothing to do with Clarence's death. That was Edward's call, after he grew tired of Clarence constantly disagreeing with him and challenging him. However, it's unlikely that he could have killed him without getting at least tacit approval from his other brother, Richard. In Richard's famous soliloquy at the end of Act 3, Scene 2, Richard says that he can set the murderous Machiavel to school. Well, the speech would have taken place in 1465, 4 years before Niccolo Machiavelli was even born. Henry VI actually insisted on taking York's head down from the pike when he saw it on display, because he thought it was barbaric for a Christian king to treat somebody so disgracefully. Queen Margaret was actually imprisoned for 4 years during these conflicts, while Henry hid out in Scotland. When Edward IV tried to persuade Lady Elizabeth Grey to be his mistress, she refused even after he put a dagger to her throat. After that, he decided to marry her, but I'm not sure why, because he was known to be a notorious womanizer who had many mistresses, including the Earl of Shrewsbury's daughter, Elizabeth Lucy, and fathered no less than 10 illegitimate children. He also grew very fat from gluttony and drank heavily, factors that contributed to his death in 1483 at only 40 years of age. But perhaps what I found most interesting was Queen Elizabeth's obsession with marrying members of her family into noble families. The most extreme example of this was her brother John Woodville, who was only 19 years old when he married Catherine Neville, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, and by the way, Warwick's aunt, who was 65 years old at the time of the marriage. Warwick was so outraged that he hunted Woodville down and had him beheaded in 1469. The marriage produced no children. When we return, we'll look at some of the great actors in the 1983 BBC Shakespeare version of Henry VI, Part 3. All right, now let's take a look at some of the great actors in the 1983 BBC Shakespeare version of Henry VI, Part 3. And just like with Part 2, brace yourself because there sure are a lot of them. Peter Benson, who plays King Henry VI, also plays the same role in Henry VI Parts 1 and 2 and Richard III, all in 1983, the second Gravedigger in Hamlet in 1980, and Clown's Servant in The Winter's Tale in 1981. Rowena Cooper, who plays Lady Elizabeth Grey and Queen Elizabeth, reprised her role in Richard III in 1983. Marilena Kendall, who plays Lady Bona, also played Andromache in Troilus and Cressida and Amelia in The Winter's Tale, both in 1981. Nick Redding, who played Edward, Prince of Wales, returns as Edward's ghost in Richard III in 1983. The talented Julia Foster, who plays Margaret, also played the same role in Henry VI Parts 1 and 2 and Richard III, all in 1983. Anthony Brown, who plays Sir John Montgomery and Louis King of France, also played the Duke of Burgundy in Henry VI Part I, Walter Whitmore and Alexander Iden in Henry VI Part II, and Sir Richard Ratcliffe in Richard III, all in 1983. Paul Chapman, who plays Lord Rivers, also played the Earl of Suffolk in Henry VI Parts I and II, and returns as Lord Rivers in Richard III, all in 1983. Ron Cook, who plays Richard, Duke of Gloucester, also played the Third Messenger and the Countess's Porter in Henry VI Part I, Richard Plantagenet in Henry VI Part II, and becomes Richard III in Richard III, all in 1983. In addition, he also played Peter Simple in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1982. Bernard Hill, who plays the Duke of York, also played the Master Gunner and the Duke of York in Henry VI Parts I and II, and returns as the First Murderer and Sir William Brandon in Richard III, all in 1983. In addition, he also played Captain Smith in the 1997 blockbuster film Titanic and the Duke of Norfolk in the Wolf Hall series. Brian Prothero, who plays King Edward IV, also played the Bastard of Orleans, how's that for a resume builder, in Henry VI Part I, Edward Plantagenet in Henry VI Parts I and II, as well as Richard III, all in 1983. He also played Saturninus in Titus Andronicus in 1985. Tennille Evans, who played various roles, also played the Duke of Bedford, Edmund Mortimer, and a French general in Henry VI Part I, the Earl of Salisbury in Henry VI Part II, and Lord Stanley in Richard III, all in 1983. He also played Sir Hugh Evans in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1982. Derek Farr, who plays the Duke of Exeter and the Mayor of York, also played Sir William Lucy and the Earl of Salisbury in Henry VI Part I, Lord Say in Henry VI Part II, and Sir Robert Brackenbury and the Earl of Surrey in Richard III, all in 1983. Brian Deacon, who plays the Earl of Oxford, also played the Earl of Somerset in Henry VI Parts I and II, and several roles including Henry, Earl of Richmond in Richard III, all in 1983. Derek Fuke, who plays the Duke of Westmoreland, also played various roles in Henry VI Parts I and II, and Richard III, all in 1983. Angus McNamara, who plays young Clifford, also played various roles in Henry VI Parts I and II, and Lord Lovell in Richard III, all in 1983. The excellent actor Mark Wing Davey, who plays the Earl of Warwick, played the same role in Henry VI Parts I and II, and returns as Sir James Tyrrell in Richard III, all in 1983. Michael Byrne, who plays the Marquis of Montague, also played the Duke of Alençon in Henry VI Part I, John Hume in Henry VI Part II, and the Duke of Buckingham in Richard III, and Antonio in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, all in 1983. Arthur Cox, who plays the Duke of Somerset, plays the Mayor of London and Sir John Falstaff in Henry VI Part I, Lord Clifford in Henry VI Part II, and Lord Grey and the Lord Mayor of London in Richard III, all in 1983. David Dacre, who plays Lord Hastings, played Rainier, the Duke of Anjou, and Vernon in Henry VI Part I, the Duke of Buckingham in Henry VI Part II, and returns as Lord Hastings in Richard III, all in 1983. Peter Wyatt, who plays the Duke of Norfolk, also played Woodville in Henry VI Part I, Sir Humphrey Stafford in Henry VI Part II, and the Duke of Norfolk again in Richard III, all in 1983. Alex Gard, who plays various characters, including the Marquis of Dorset, also played young John Talbot in Henry VI Part I, the Second Prentice in Henry VI Part II, and the Marquis of Dorset again in Richard III, all in 1983. John Benfield, who plays the Earl of Northumberland, also played various roles in Henry VI Parts 1 and 2 in 1983. In addition, he also played the jailer in The Winter's Tale in 1981 and several roles in Titus Andronicus in 1985. Peter Aldwin, who plays the Second Company, plays the same role in Henry VI Parts 1 and 2 and Richard III, all in 1983, and a British captain in Cymbeline in 1982. And finally, once again, Paul Jesson, who plays George Plantagenet, also played Clown in The Winter's Tale in 1981, Cloten in Cymbeline in 1982, multiple roles including the Second Messenger to the King and the Duke of Clarence in Henry VI Parts 1 and 2 and in Richard III, all in 1983, the First Citizen in Coriolanus in 1984, and Costard in Love's Labour's Lost in 1985. That means that he has appeared in 8 different BBC Shakespeare plays. By my count, more than any other actor in the entire series. Bravo, Paul. Now, stay tuned for today's trivia challenge, which is called A Chorus Line. Okay, and now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called A Chorus Line. Shakespeare used a narrator in several plays, usually known as a chorus. Name the play in which the following first line appears from a chorus or a narrator. Number 1, two households, both alike in dignity. Number 2, to sing a song that old was sung. And number 3, oh, for a muse of fire. When we get back, I'll have the answers for you, as well as some relevant lessons from Henry VI Part 3. Okay, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called A Chorus Line. Shakespeare used a narrator in several plays, usually known as chorus. You were to name the play in which the following first line appears from a chorus or the narrator. Number 1, two households, both alike in dignity. That was chorus in Romeo and Juliet. Number 2, to sing a song that old was sung. That was by Gower in Pericles, Prince of Tyre. And number 3, oh, for a muse of fire. That was chorus in Henry V. Now, let's wrap up with some relevant lessons from Henry VI Part 3. First, commit to your commitments. If you give your word, make sure that you keep your word. Or in the words of Brownsville Station, let your yeah be yeah and your no be no. Second, do things for the right reasons, not conditionally or to serve your own agenda. Become a leader worth following, and people will follow you anywhere. And number 3, always choose honor over opportunity. As we've seen in these history plays, fame is fleeting, and it's rare to find anyone who doesn't change sides with the wind. As the saying goes, in matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a young couple will find the truth about the saying, out of sight, out of mind.